Everything you've been told about Tulip Mania is wrong. Not slightly exaggerated. Not a little oversimplified. Wrong. The story you've heard, a nation gripped by madness, sailors accidentally eating fortunes, an entire economy collapsing over flowers, most of that never happened at all. And the strange part is, the real story is arguably more interesting than the myth, because it reveals something about how history gets rewritten by the people who benefit from the rewrite. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll never see the first financial bubble the same way again. Here's the version most people know. In the 1630s, the Dutch became so obsessed with tulip bulbs that prices spiraled out of control. Regular citizens, bricklayers, chimney sweeps, were supposedly trading their life savings, even their houses, for a single bulb. Then, almost overnight, the market collapsed, fortunes were wiped out, and the Dutch economy was left in ruins. It's a great story. It's been repeated in economics textbooks, finance YouTube videos, even Wall Street trading floors, as the ultimate cautionary tale of mass hysteria and market madness. There's just one problem: almost none of that holds up when you actually look at the primary sources. So where did this myth actually come from? And what really happened in the Dutch Republic in the winter of 1637? Let's start with the real facts, the ones historians who've actually dug through Dutch notarial archives keep finding. Tulips were genuinely valuable in the Dutch Republic during this period, that part is true. The Netherlands was in the middle of its golden age, wealth was flooding in from global trade, and rare tulip varieties, especially ones with unusual flame patterns caused by a mosaic virus, became luxury status symbols, similar to owning a rare painting or an exotic import today. Prices for the rarest bulbs did rise, some single bulbs traded for the equivalent of a skilled craftsman's annual salary. That part of the story is real. But here's what almost never makes it into the popular retelling: this market was small. Historians estimate it primarily involved a limited circle of wealthy merchants and specialized tulip traders, not the entire Dutch population panic buying bulbs with their mortgage money. Then in February 1637, prices for these futures contracts did crash suddenly, that part is also true. But what actually happened next is almost the opposite of the economy collapsed. Contract disputes were resolved through negotiation and local courts. Most of the buyers simply hadn't paid yet, because many of these trades were forward contracts, promises to pay later for a bulb that hadn't even bloomed. When prices crashed, courts largely allowed buyers to settle for a small percentage of the agreed price, rather than the full amount. There's no reliable evidence of a broader Dutch economic depression following this event. No mass bankruptcies across the population. No evidence the overall Dutch economy, which continued thriving through the rest of the 1600s, even noticed. So if the national hysteria version isn't accurate, where did it even come from? A huge part of the answer traces back to moralizing pamphlets published after the crash, some by Dutch Calvinist religious writers who saw the tulip trade as a symbol of greed and vanity that God was punishing. These pamphlets weren't neutral economic reporting. They were closer to sermons, using exaggerated stories to warn people against speculation and excess. Then, centuries later, the myth got another major boost from a 19th-century Scottish journalist named Charles Mackay, who included Tulip Mania in his 1841 book about crowd psychology and financial folly. Mackay's version leaned heavily on those old moralizing pamphlets rather than the actual trading records, and added dramatic, memorable details of his own, including some anecdotes modern historians can't verify actually happened, like the story of a sailor accidentally eating a valuable bulb thinking it was an onion. That single book became one of the most widely read sources on financial bubbles for the next 150 years, quoted by economists, journalists, and eventually, every finance YouTuber and Wall Street analyst who wanted a dramatic historical analogy for the dot-com bubble, the 2008 crash, or crypto volatility. In other words, the cautionary tale you've heard is really a story that got exaggerated by religious moralists, amplified by a Victorian journalist chasing a good narrative, and then repeated for 2 centuries because it made for a better lesson than the boring, complicated truth. Here's why this isn't just a fun historical footnote, it actually matters for how we think about financial bubbles today. When people cite tulip mania as proof that humans are irrational and markets always spiral into madness, they're often citing a story that isn't accurate, which means the actual lesson might be different than we assume. The real tulip story isn't about an entire nation losing its mind. It's about a small, specialized luxury market experiencing a localized correction, then getting turned into a morality tale by writers with an agenda, centuries after the fact. That's a very different, and honestly more useful, lesson. Sometimes what we think we know about financial history isn't history at all. It's the version of history that made the best story. So here's my question for you. If Tulip Mania isn't really the first financial bubble, what do you think actually deserves that title? Drop your answer in the comments. Some people argue it's the Mississippi bubble in France. Some say it's the South Sea bubble in England. I have my own opinion, but I want to hear yours first, because the debate in the comments on this channel is honestly better than most finance forums I've read. If you like having your assumptions about financial history taken apart like this, subscribe, because this channel exists specifically to dig past the version of history that gets repeated the most and find the version that's actually true. And if you want to see a bubble that did wipe out a real economy, not a myth, an actual documented collapse, watch this video next on the Mississippi bubble, where one man became richer than most kings in Europe, then lost it all in 3 months. Thanks for watching. Which part of this surprised you the most? Let me know below, and if you want more forgotten history like this, subscribe, there's a lot more coming.